Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Cardboard Dragon Reviews. Chris here, and today we are taking a look at Fury of Dracula, the new 3rd edition from Fantasy Flight Games. So this is a reprinting of firstly an original Games Workshop game, then a Fantasy Flight game from several years ago, and now finally a 3rd edition has come out. Fury of Dracula has been a very sought after game, at least the 2nd edition. Because it's been hard to get, because it's been out of print for so long, and also because it's generally considered a pretty good game. And I'm making no secrets about this. You can check my Board Game Geek profile. I love the 2nd edition of the game. It's one of my favorite versions. So I picked this up. Essentially what this game is a hidden movement game. Dracula is going to be wandering around Europe in secret, and he is going to be spreading his influence throughout the land with things like new vampires. But the other players, 1 to 4 of them, are going to be controlling 4 hunters. And these are all characters from Bram Stoker's book. So you have Mina Harker here, you have Van Helsing here. They are going to be trying to find Dracula and kill him before his influence becomes too great in Europe and it overwhelms them. And again, Dracula will be moving in secret throughout the board, so the hunters will have to be trying to follow his trail. So if you are new to Fury of Dracula, I'll be going over briefly how this plays. I'm not going to go over all the rules on how to play it. And if you are a 2nd edition veteran, at least, I've never played the 1st edition, but a 2nd edition veteran, I have the 2nd edition, and while I was playing this, I was making note of all the things I noticed that were different from this version to the other version. And I think there's actually a fair bit of tweaking that went on, maybe some streamlining, but I don't necessarily think it was dumbed down. But with that being said, let me go ahead and show you how this plays, and then I'll go ahead and give you my final thoughts and a comparison with the previous version. So let's take a quick look at how this game plays. So the hunters try to kill Dracula, and that's the only way that they can win the game. Dracula needs to play a bit of a longer game. He's attempting to score 13 points, which is marked on this track up here. He scores points if he can kill a hunter, which isn't usually how things happen. Normally he scores points by what's called maturing vampires. So he'll plant vampires around locations in Europe, and if they can last long enough without the hunters finding and killing them, he'll score some points. So let's talk about what Dracula does. So we can see here, this is essentially Dracula's trail, and I'm just showing you a piece of it here. But Dracula, when he moves, he uses these location cards. And it's this deck here. So every spot in the game, every place on the board has one of these cards. So basically, if he wants to move there, he has to lay a card down on the track. The first move of the game, he doesn't do anything with it. He doesn't add anything to it. But the next move he makes, he will slide this over and add a new card face down here. And then he'll be able to add an encounter to it. So encounters are various different things. Here we have wolves, and they're all bad for hunters to get to. But the hunters are trying to find things like, here we have an aristocratic vampire. So there's 3 different types of vampires. This is one of them. You see at the bottom there's something called a matured effect. So if Dracula is able to basically push these locations, but keep adding more and more as he moves off the board, he gets the location back in his hand, and then whatever card on it, he can either make what's called a lair, which is basically just one stronghold space on the board where he can have multiple encounters on a card, or he can do, more likely, he'll do the maturing effect. In this case with a vampire, it's scoring points, so he would definitely want to do that. Other cards do more devastating things or more damage or slow hunters down more if they get matured. So that's how Dracula moves. It's important to note, again, there's only 1 copy of every card in the game for a location. So if Dracula moves to Paris once, and you know Paris is on the trail because you've found it, you know he can't be in Paris again unless he uses some very strange powers. He has some weird power cards here that let him move extra ways, or get some health back, or get some extra encounter cards, because he only has a limited number to start, and he's usually trying to hope to get some vampires. That's basically what Dracula is doing. Now what the hunters are doing on their turn is trying basically to find those locations that are on Dracula's trail. So Dracula himself can only move by cities following the red lines. He can also move by sea, but it hurts him to do that. Hunters, on the other hand, can use the rails or the roads. And rails are typically faster than using the road, as railway tickets usually let you move multiple rails in one single go. And there are also very long railways in certain parts that save you a lot of time. And hunters can also move to sea. But the crux of the game is moving to a location. And if Dracula has been there, the card is on his trail, he shows it to you. So you will know, for instance, we're in Genoa here. If we move here, Dracula has to show us if he's been there, and he'll flip the card over. Now, he might not show us if he has an encounter on it. He might not show us what that is. So we'll have to do an action to look in Genoa for what he planted there, but we'll be on his trail. And if he is in that spot right now, he moves his figure onto the board, so we know that's where Dracula is. And then we're going to have a fight. But let's talk about more things that hunters can do. So hunters' actions are split between the day and the night. Each hunter will take one day action, and then after that they'll take one night action. So all 4 hunters in a row take a day action, then they start over again, and then they all do a night action. So your actions are move, which you can only do during the day, get train tickets, you can rest to recover some damage, you can use a special ability that you might have, like an event card, or a special ability on your character that you can use. You can search to see what's in that city if Dracula has been there. There's no point searching if Dracula has never been there. You can supply, which gets you items and events, or you can trade with other characters. So let's take a look at a character here. So every character has a character sheet. So here we have Lord Godalming. He has 2 abilities. We can see that written there. It also gives us like a summary of the turn. We can see he has 1 spot with a fang looking thing. That means he can absorb 1 bite, and the second bite will basically defeat him. And he has 11 hit points. It also lists on it how many event and item cards he can hold, which is 3 each. Same for everybody, except for 1 character whose ability is to be able to hold more. So his abilities aren't actions, aren't in themselves actions. They just make the actions he takes better. He gets more items and more train tickets when he uses the actions to get items or train tickets. And the other characters have other things that let them heal other players, or maybe see if Dracula's in the same region as them. Dracula has some abilities too. They're not really abilities. He has 15 hit points, so he's pretty beefy. Yeah, it just describes him when he defeats a hunter, how many points he gets. If 3 weeks have passed by, how he gets extra points with the Fury of Dracula ability. It also has Pride, which explains when he can and can't escape from combat. So what are some things you can search for? Hunters can get items like rifles, for instance, or a good old-fashioned steak, pistol, knife, garlic. Of course, you always need garlic. These are typically things that are going to be used when you fight Dracula. So you need to kind of stock up on things to defend yourself, because without them, Dracula can actually overpower you and kill you. And he can do it anyway, even if you're stocked up, but it's much less likely to happen. You also have event cards that you will draw when you supply in any city. So these cards have 2 backs to them here. You can see the 2 different backs. See, there's the red bat and the gray with crosses on it. So gray-backed events are for hunters. And the ones with the red skull bat on them are for Dracula. So when it's daytime and you're supplying, you take the top card of the deck. If it's for you, you keep it and you can use it. If it's Dracula's, you throw it away and he doesn't get it. Now if it's nighttime and you're supplying, you have to draw the card from the bottom of the deck. You don't know what that is. This case, the hunters were lucky. It was a card for them, but it could have just as easily have been a bat card that goes to Dracula, and then you've basically given him a card that he can use. Might give him some power to slow you down, or things like that. Now the deck is weighted in the hunter's favor. 2/3 of the cards are the hunters, 1/3 of the cards are for Dracula. So those are events and items. Events can do things like help you find where Dracula is, or recover some damage, or mitigate some damage against you. And yeah, or they could be Dracula ones, which could be pretty terrible for you. So going back to the timer here that's on the top of the board, every day action, after everybody's taken the day action, you slide the clock down one to a night time, and then every time the hunters have taken all their night actions, that's when Dracula goes. He lays a location down, puts an encounter on it, and then we go to the next day and continue on. When this clock goes all the way around, we add a despair token to the clock here, which kind of makes Dracula stronger in that he usually gets bonus points when he does something based on how many despair tokens are on the board. And also, if all 3 pieces of the despair pie are on the board, every time he lays a location down from then on, he gets a free 3 points. So it's pretty devastating to let him get that far in the game. But the more of these tokens there are on the board, the harder it is for Dracula to escape from combat. So let's talk about combat a little bit here. So here are just some examples of cards you might have. And Dracula draws a hand of 5 cards from a deck that he can't really add anything to. It's kind of a static deck. So how combat works in this game is if you're in the same spot with Dracula at dusk or at dawn, you have a combat with him. You each pick one of your cards and you lay it face down on the table. So let's say we pick garlic. So you lay garlic face down. Dracula also lays a card face down. Okay, and then we reveal them. So I've chosen garlic here and Dracula has chosen strength. And they say on them what they do, but you don't worry about that yet. You see the symbols at the top of the cards? You compare, first you look at what Dracula has. He has this fist looking symbol. And you look if the hunter card also has that symbol. And it does. So Dracula's card is canceled. It doesn't do anything. Then we look at what the hunter's card does. So it says if you are the engaged hunter and fangs or claws was played, the vampire suffers 2 damage. Fangs or claws was not played. So this is more of a defensive card that you would play if you think Dracula is going to play fangs or claws. Instead he played strength. So nothing happens this turn. Nobody gets dealt any damage. Let's do a different example here where Dracula wins. So if I had picked knife and Dracula had picked strength, we can see that the fist symbol on Dracula's strength is not matched on the knife card. So what happens is Dracula's card gets resolved, and it gets resolved first. It says the engaged hunter suffers 2 damage. If he played punch, crucifix, or a weapon card, and this is a weapon card, it says weapon underneath the picture, cancel that card. So it means this is going to have no effect. If it is night and they played a crucifix or weapon card, discard that card. So if it was nighttime when we were fighting, the hunter would actually lose this weapon. Thematically, I guess Dracula disarmed them. Now, if we had a card here from Dracula that didn't cancel the card that the hunter played, the hunter card would still go through. So if this was a different card that didn't cancel the knife, even if Dracula succeeded, the knife would still go through. So, unless Dracula's card cancels what the hunter's card is, it specifically says it cancels it or discards it, the hunter still gets to do their attack. So let's see if I have a card just to explain what I'm doing. Yeah, so we have, I have to dig through the deck here, I'm sorry. Here's claws. This is a better example. So let's say this is what happens. So the symbols don't match. Dracula's attack goes through. The engaged hunter suffers 2 damage. If it is night, choose another hunter in this combat to suffer an additional 2 damage. So that goes through because the symbols don't match. But then the knife also goes through because Dracula's claws don't cancel it. So I hope that makes sense. It's actually pretty simple how it plays out. You're just matching symbols, but what it turns into is, I know that this player has a knife because I've seen it earlier, so I need to play a card that is going to still be effective against the knife, and vice versa. I think Dracula is going to play claws, so maybe I'll play something that's going to block his claws. So combat can happen with Dracula, but it can also happen with the vampires that he lays around on the board if you find them. You kind of have to kill them too. 2 of the 3 types you have to fight to kill. So that's combat. I think that's really about it. So the game keeps going until Dracula scores 13 points or the hunters find and kill him. So the important thing for the hunters is to start to get on Dracula's trail, start clearing off the vampires that he's laid down on the board so he doesn't score as many points, and then track him through his trail and see where he could be. Now he can run to the sea, but it hurts him to do that, and you will see when he goes to the sea. So it's a lot of trying to get on the trail, trying to clear up the vampires that he has laid down there, and then finding him and eventually killing him. But Dracula will almost always try to escape from combat. He has some escaping cards. But again, he can't play those until he's played more cards than there are despair tokens on the board. So as the game progresses, it's harder and harder for Dracula to run away from you. So that's a quick overview of what Fury of Dracula is and how it plays. So let me go ahead and give you my final thoughts on the game. All right, final thoughts time for Fury of Dracula 3rd edition. One complaint about this game, the cover art is undeniably worse than the 2nd edition. And they actually use a 2nd edition cover art in one of the rule books, which is kind of funny, so they could still use it, but it looks kind of oddly cartoony with the bats and stuff. But other than that, I think this game is an improvement over the 2nd edition. And for me, that's big praise because the 2nd edition is one of my favorite games. So just in general, without comparing it to the 2nd edition, why is Fury of Dracula a great game? This is a 10 out of 10 game for me, by the way. So again, I don't have very much to complain about with this. We'll just start off the bat by saying that. What makes this game great is the epic feel that comes with running around Europe, trying to trace down this evil guy who's laying traps for you, but also new vampires that you need to find and kill, and you're stocking up on items and garlic and holy bullets and all kinds of stuff that's going to help you take him down. And eventually, when you start to get on his trail, as a hunter player, that's very exciting, and as a Dracula player, it's terrifying because you start to see their hands basically wrapping around your throat. Their grip is tightening on you, and you're trying to get away, doing all the devious powers you can, using every tool in your arsenal. But, you know, in a game I played last night, just simply was not enough. I ended up getting killed. I needed 3 more points to win, I made a last-ditch attack because I was surrounded by hunters, and I picked the weakest one and thought, well, I might as well fight them one-on-one and try to kill them. Didn't work out. I died by a punch to the face after having some brutal combat against 2 hunters earlier. So that is awesome. There are things that happen in this game, like what I just told you, that you remember. I remember being ganged up on and beat like that. It's essentially kind of stories that come out of this game because there's cool things that happen. In the second edition of the game, which can still happen in this one, my wife ended up making a move that got her caught, and she had no more legal moves to make, which essentially is called cheating in this game, though it's not really cheating. You face a penalty for it. And I thought, oh man, this is going to be no problem. We're going to be able to wipe her out. And she actually won that game through some very sneaky moves that she made at the end and survived. So that can definitely happen, and that's awesome. There aren't many board games where you can play them and remember play sessions, at least not for me. Sometimes weird things happen, or people get super high scores or mop the floor with people, but instances of stuff like that happening in the game, those stick with me in Fury of Dracula. All the mechanics in this game are, I would say, fairly simple. There is some complexity here. You wouldn't want to play this with brand new people, but once you start playing, it's actually not that difficult of a game to play. All the cards, you're not going to know what they all do until you played a few times, but they say on them what they do. So you'll be able to track, I guess, have a better idea of what could be happening with Dracula the more that you play this game. As far as components go, I think this game is awesome. I don't want to get into too much detail with the second edition yet, but I think the cards, the lack of dice, all that stuff is great in this game. The way the time works, I think, is interesting and neat. You have differences in what, not so much now what you can do at night, but some of your cards are stronger at night as Dracula versus when you're in the daytime. This mechanic, I always really like this mechanic of this deck, the event deck, and having to draw off the bottom and possibly getting a Dracula card out of that because you can't see what you're drawing. That's pretty neat. And it gives some tension to the game of, gee, do I really want to be looking in that deck? Do we need to do it now? And I think it brings about some balance to the game, because when you're on Dracula's trail, you kind of don't want to be looking for these cards, because you could give him a card that's basically going to save him from you finding him. Which is then good for Dracula because he doesn't really have to worry about people drawing those event cards. And further boosting their ability to find him. Yeah, I like everything about this game. The combat is fun. The combat is really interesting once you start to know the cards and what people have. If you're a Dracula and you can see what people have, and the hunters know what Dracula has, it turns into sort of rock, paper, scissors. What is he going to play? What are they going to play? Let's try and counter that by picking something that they're not expecting that's going to counter the card that they picked. It's actually a really cool system, but you need to know what cards are, at least need to know what cards Dracula has, because he always has the same set of, this deck is always the same, but he'll have 5 of this deck at a time. So it's kind of good to know what he might be trying to do to you, like when he might be trying to use his fangs, so you can pull out a card that blocks fangs, for instance. So, do I recommend this game? Absolutely. It is a longer game. It's 2 to 3 hours. The first time you play is probably going to take you 3 hours because you're going to be wanting to go through things slowly, making sure you're doing everything right. With that being said, I think this is the best hidden movement game available on the market. I think it was already with the second edition, though that was basically impossible to find unless you want to pay a couple $100s for it. And they've managed to streamline certain things about the game that were kind of just unneeded complexity, in my opinion, and make things simpler. but not dumber, just streamlined in a way that makes sense. So I think this is the best hidden movement game available on the market if you're okay putting up the 2 to 3 hours it takes to play it. Now, let's talk about for those people who have played the second edition. I literally took notes while I was playing to figure out what I noticed that was different after we finished. So, first thing for second edition people, there's no dice anymore in the game. There's no train dice. There's no rolling of dice for combat. There are no dice whatsoever in the game. Of course, train stuff is now done through train tickets, which you draw, which denote how far you can move. We can see it used to be, speaking of the train, used to be divided into kind of two halves of Europe. And they still sort of have that with the weaker railroads and the better railways. That's still in the game, but the board isn't really divided into east and west. It's now into regions, which is all the different colors. And certain cards deal with being in a region. And Mina Harker's ability is to, if she's with another hunter, she can ask Dracula if they're in their region. So that's a difference in how they laid out the board. Again, these are now what were your encounter chits. Are these cards here? So I think this is just better. It's easier to manage for you. And it says specifically on the cards what they do. I know you won't be able to read this, but anyway, the text is right on the cards. You don't have to look at a rule book. So hero abilities have been changed in the game. And all the cards have been reworked to fit with the new system. That kind of goes without saying, but... So, in the previous editions, you could have encounters with, like, Dracula's servants, which I believe were supposed to be, like, gypsies. And that is no longer the case. While those are still in the game, you don't fight them. They're not out to... They're no, like, assassins. The only combat you have is with vampires, which is another difference. There are 3 types of vampires in the encounter deck, not just Dracula's brides now, and 2 of the 3 fight back. They kind of did in the second edition with rules about having a stake and stuff and what happened at night, but not really. You actually have a combat against them. So I was able, in my last game I played, to escape the combat, and then I was able to mature that vampire and score points. Whereas in the other edition, it just would have been dead once they found it. So that is kind of neat. Hunter movement. Hunter movement is no longer a phase in the game. It is an action. So you have, like I explained, you have 2 actions in a turn. The first of those during the day can be movement, but doesn't have to be. You don't automatically get a move in this game. In the other game, you could, of course, pass your movement, but it's one of the actions you could take. Searching a location, when you get to a location, is no longer automatic. Dracula has to tell you if he's there or he's been there, but he doesn't have to show you what encounters are on that card. That costs you an action. Now, he could do that, which is ambushing you, but he might not want to do that because, again, it's going to cost you an action to have to look there. And so it sort of slows you down. Hunters do 1 action at a time. So in their order of 1, 2, 3, 4, they all make like a move, for instance, and then starting again, 1, 2, 3, 4, they do 1 more action. So that's different. It used to be this character does all their actions, then this character, then this character. So that can lead to some interesting interactions and might influence the way you move your characters, such as moving them, trying to get them closer to each other, depending on what people find. Drawing event cards, again, is different. I mentioned I like the mechanic of drawing from the bottom of the deck. During the daytime, it's safer for hunters to search because they see what the top card is. If it's their card, they take it, and if it's Dracula's card, they throw it away. So that's an interesting play on a mechanic I already liked. The Catacombs are different. This isn't something I ever used a whole lot in the second edition, which probably means I'm a terrible Dracula player, but you used to be able to move, when you matured something, you could move that location to the Catacombs. You can do that here too. So you move it to the Catacombs, you add another encounter on it, but now you can go back to that spot. If you can make a legal move to go back to that spot, you can literally move that now called the lair, what used to be Catacomb, back onto your trail, adding another encounter to it. So you can make like a big bomb of stuff waiting to go off onto people. Combat. Combat is completely overhauled in this game. There's no dice rolling. The idea is sort of similar, like what happens depends on what cards we play with each other. Like the interaction between cards changes depending on what ones we picked. I like this version better. The dice didn't feel very fleshed out to me. There were ways to boost what numbers you rolled on your dice, but they were very few and far between. So it was basically the highest roll wins, which was kind of odd. I like this version better. I think it's more streamlined. I think it makes more sense. I definitely prefer this combat better. And my one criticism of the past game was that combat felt a little weak. I think this feels better. I still don't think this is the greatest combat I've ever played, but I think it's serviceable. I think it's good in this game. Power cards. Dracula has his power cards again. There's one different one, which is a misdirect, which lets him pull a card out from his location trail. They used to be restricted by night and day. That's no longer the case. You can use them all at any time, but there are certain cards you play, usually your combat cards, that are typically more effective if you use them at night. Like there's an extra ability if you use it at night. So there is still a night and day influence on the game. Scene moves are simpler. It used to be, and this is one of those, they had some of these rules that were like one-off in the rule book. You have to kind of try to remember them. It used to be if you were in a port and you went out to sea, returning to that same port was an illegal move. That's no longer the case in this game. And I probably wouldn't have noticed that, except that came up twice in our last game that we played. Somebody did that both on the same turn. They were going out to sea to find me. Another player saw where Dracula was, and they pulled back. That would have been an illegal move. They would have wasted a whole bunch of time in the previous version. Not here. The other version of the rules had some ways of forming like groups and doing things together. That's no longer in this game. There are no more resolve points earned by hunters. There is the idea of delay in this game, which seems to be a Fantasy Flight trademark now, where you lay your character down and then you have to spend an action to get them back up. And lastly, there's the despair tokens. Every time a week passes, one of the three despair tokens gets, another one of the three gets added to the track. This has some impact on cards. It can get Dracula more points depending how many despair tokens are on the board. But it also makes it harder for him to escape in combat because he has to play a number of cards greater than the number of despair tokens before he can play an escape. But it also triggers Dracula's Fury of Dracula ability. If all three are on the board and he lays a all three despair tokens are on the board, every time he lays a location, he scores 3 points. So that's basically a timer that's going to end the game. And there kind of was that already in the other version, but it's basically almost the game is over at that point because Dracula scores so many points. Those are all the differences I noticed. There might be some more minor things. Obviously, the cards and the boards and the components are reworked, except for the figures are the only real similar thing here. But overall, as a second edition player, I'm glad I picked this up. Second edition was already one of my favorite games. I think this is an improvement in every way. None of those things I mentioned to you I miss or feel they were done better in the second edition. There are some maybe lateral moves, not improvements, not made worse, but aside from the cover art, I think this is a better version of an already great game. I highly recommend you get this game, and especially if you were one of those people who wanted the second edition, man, this is the superior version, in my opinion, as a second edition player and owner. Definitely pick this game up. If you're into hidden movement games and you're willing to put in the 2 to 3 hours to play a game, this is one of the best experiences I've had playing board games. It is awesome. It is thematic. It is epic. So Fury of Dracula, 10 out of 10 for me. One of my favorites. So this has been Chris for Cardboard Dragon Reviews. And until next time, keep your dice on the table.